After you've glued your box together, it's time to do the finish sanding. Finish sanding for any project is one of the most important steps of the entire process. If you don't do a good job with sanding, your finish, regardless of whether you're staining and top coating or just top coating, there is no way to hide a bad sanding job. So this is really important to understand the concept. What you're trying to accomplish here is to get all of the dried glue, all of the cross-grain scratches on your panels from the Time Saver white belt sander, and to make it look really, really nice. When it comes to sanding, you don't ever want to start with a glue scraper when it comes to your box. And I'm going to bring the camera down and I'm going to show you why it's not a good idea to do that. So if you look at these corners, I'm going to try and zoom, I don't have to zoom. When you look at these corners here, this surface here and this surface here are coming to a point where there is virtually nothing there. I do have dried glue on this corner right here. Okay, you can see all these dried glue bits. The worst thing you can do is take a glue scraper to that to get it off. The main reason being is if that glue is holding on to that corner where it comes to a point, if you use a glue scraper, you run the risk of tearing those corners off. And I will tell you right now, there is nothing that we can do to fix them other than filling them with wood filler of some kind. Whether it's an actual wood putty or a poor man's putty where you mix it with a little bit of glue and sawdust or sanding dust, it's just not going to look right. It's not going to look the same way as before when it's solid wood. So at this point, all we need is a random orbital sander, and I want you to take a really close look at your sanding disc. If it's worn out, take it off, fold it in half, and throw it over here in the hand tool cabinet. And it does have a little bit of afterlife use when it comes to hand sanding. But for a random orbital sander, it might be dead. It might be fried. It might be useless. So this one, I just got done sanding one little project, and I know that it's actually going to be okay for this project. So I'm going to finish using this sanding disc to sand my box. So I always start on the face and the back. Just because it's just a force of habit. I've put so many of these together, I always do the broad surfaces first, the large surfaces, which are the front and the back. The sides I will end up doing later. So when I am doing this, I am looking at the stiles. The stiles, when we put it into the sander, they went in this direction. Okay, if you can remember that far back, they went in this direction, and the sanding occurred with the grain on the rails and the panel. The sanding went across the stiles, however. So if you look at this really carefully, I'm going to bring the sander down and I'm going to move my box up so you can actually see. Sorry, I hope none of you are seasick. You can actually see what I'm talking about. I am going to have to move it over here so you can see in the light a little bit better. So if I bring this up and get it in the right light, you can see the cross-grain scratches that are going across the panel. That is exactly what we need to sand out. Okay? So if you see the white lines going across the grain, let me see if I can, it's not going to be the same. So you're looking across the grain. The scratches are going this direction. When I bring it back up, I'm actually angling it so that you can see them in the right light. And you may have to do the exact same thing. Angle it, get it in the right light, move it around a little bit, and you'll be able to see those scratches. That's what we're trying to remove in this entire process, both on the front and the sides. The backs were sanded with the grain, but we still have to sand it out. It's still very important to have to sand that out. Let's see here, got to get my positioning right again. All right, here we go. So this is how you're going to do it. Again, do not use the glue scraper on your anything on your box at this point. I've got my sander. I'm going to bring down the hose. Okay, I'm going to connect it. So just as a review, pull back on the fitting on the hose and insert the connector that's on the sander, press them together and release. If it doesn't pop like it just did, maybe just twist it. Maybe you need to push a little bit harder. Yep, I just had to push a little bit harder. So the sander is quite away from my body, so it's a little bit more difficult to do. So this is ready to go. I am going to need to use a dust mask for this. My voice is going to sound a little bit muffled going forward, but I will enunciate so you can hear me a little bit more clearly. Okay, here goes the fun. Now, when we sand, we want to sand with the grain. Okay, so with the grain on the panel and the rails is like this. With the stiles is sanding like this. And we don't ever want to go across. It's not going to hurt it with this sander. It's just a method that you need to get used to. You always, always, always want to sand with the grain. Even though when this sander is going round and round and round, going with the grain is not critical. It's just a technique that you need to get accustomed to. Okay, here we go. I'm going to start on the rails. Now, when I am sanding, the sander is 5 inches wide. The top rails are 2.5, the stiles are 2 1/4, and the bottom rail is 4. My center panel here is roughly about 3.5 inches wide. So in all reality, you probably think that, by going back and forth, I should be able to sand it out pretty well. Well, I hate to say, but that is not the case. I want you to notice how much the sander is hanging over the edge of the rail. I am going to make a pass down and back. Then I'm going to move it in just a little bit and do the same thing down and back. What I'm doing is I am placing the pressure of the sander in the middle in different areas, which will give me a different sanding result. So by pressing and keeping the pressure in the middle and moving that center from one point to the other, I'm going to get better sanding results. They're going to be more even, more consistent, and it will look better, and it will actually sand out more quickly by doing that. A lot of people have the thought that, oh, this is 5 inches, this is 2.5. All I have to do is go down and back, and guys, that is not the case. You have to move a little bit. It's called overlapping passes when it comes to a sander. And we do overlapping passes all the time, pretty much on every flat surface like this that we sand. So on the fronts and the sides, this is the technique that you're going to be using. On the back, it's a little bit different, but it's more or less the same train of thought. So you want to make a sanding pass like this, move it, make a sanding pass down and back like that. And you're going to do that and keep doing that until you sand out your stiles and your rails and center panel perfectly evenly. You don't want to over sand. You can over sand these stiles, and when you over sand them, you're going to make this and you're going to slope it off a little bit. Another thing that you don't want to do is round over these corners. If you round these over, guys, there's nothing we can do to get those sharp points back. And when you have a piece of molding coming this direction and a piece of molding coming this direction, where they meet, you're going to have a great big gaping hole if you round these over. So do not, for any reason, round over these corners. Keep the sander flat. One thing that I see a lot of students do is they have a tendency to raise it up just a little bit to concentrate and get the scratches. That is honestly one of the worst sanding practices that there is. You always keep the sander flat. Don't ever tip it for any reason when you're sanding a flat surface. If you remember right, we had to do that on the coves of your center panel before we glued this all up. But this is a curved surface, so we could get away with it. On this, you're not going to be able to get away with it. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start sanding right here on the rails, or excuse me, on the stiles. I'm going to go up and back, then I'm going to shift it over slightly, go up and back, shift it over again, up and back, and I'm just going to do that until I've sanded this surface out. And then I'm going to go to the panel and rails, and I'll go to that point. Okay, so that is actually looking really good. My stiles, my one stile, my panel, and my rails, they are looking really nice. There's a little bit more. So one thing to be aware of with knots, knots are harder than the regular grain of the wood. By nature of that, it's going to require just a little bit more sanding. And I'm not just going to concentrate on sand right on the knot. That's not a good practice either. When you concentrate on one little area, you run the risk of what's called dishing your material. If you dish your material, there's really no way of getting that out. So that is one practice that I can't stress enough that you don't want to do. If you do have a knot that is really stubborn, one thing that you can do is called feathering. Feathering is concentrating and then widening your sanding pattern and widening until you're sanding the entire surface. That's called feathering in. And by doing that, you can get away with concentrating, but you're technically not concentrating. So it looks a little bit something like this. Again, I still keep the sander flat to do this. And then I look at it again and see what kind of progress. And that did it right there. That was perfect. That was just enough. So just that one little extra step of feathering took care of all of those cross-grain scratches. Okay, my stile is done here. My top and bottom rails and center panel are for the most part done. Okay, now I'm going to come to the other rail, or gosh, the other stile, sorry. Okay, that is looking pretty good. I have another knot that is just as stubborn as this one on the other side. So I've got just a little bit of cross-grain scratches that I need to work on getting out. So I'm going to do that little bit of concentrating. And again, just that one little exercise did a pretty good job. Okay, so I'm done on that one. Now, I want you to think with me for just a minute. I started here, I did this, and then I had to go back and go with the grain. Now, when I was doing this one, I was concentrating on just going up and back. I did a little bit of cross-grain sanding, but with an orbital, it's not that big of a deal. But what I still want to do is blend this back in. Because I was going this direction and this direction, they're two opposing directions. I still want to sand this again and blend this surface in with what just a little bit of area that I sanded, the stile like this. So I'm just going to do a little bit more here. Okay, so I went all the way across. I incorporated the stiles. I was sanding across the grain. Now, if I were to do any staining on here, I'm going to see those overlapping passes on both sides. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to lightly sand the stiles with the grain, just a little bit, not very much. And that's it. That's all I have to do with that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do the exact same sanding procedure on both sides. But here's the kicker. When it comes to sanding the sides, I want you to realize that the surface is much higher than having the front like this. Okay, it's substantially different. So here's the deal. If you find that reaching over your head to sand is not practical, it's okay, there is a solution. And that solution entails cleaning a little bit of floor and It's going to help eliminate any boogers that are on the floor. Hard glue, rocks, big wood chips, big chunks of stuff from marring your faces that are on the floor. So you're going to have to get a push broom. Push brooms are right over here on the wall, and sweep the area. That's going to help a lot. The other thing that you're going to need to get is a sheet of fresh blue butcher paper. So just tear a little sheet off of the roll and bring it over and put it down on the ground. Then take your project and put it down on the floor just like this. That way you can do all of your sanding and you're not having to do anything overhead. Okay, so that's gonna tremendously help with all of you vertically challenged students that just have a hard time doing anything on the bench like this. Just transfer everything down to the floor and you'll be good to go. Okay, I'm gonna set up and do my back next, but I've got to do a little bit of cleanup here. So I'm gonna come back and do that in just a minute. Okay, I'm back and I'm set up and ready to work on the back of the chest to get it sanded out. Now I do have a couple beads, some pretty big beads of glue that dripped as I was putting the box together. It is a really good idea to use a pencil and circle or mark somehow those little areas that could be a little bit of an issue as you start going along with your sanding. Those are honestly the only two that I see. So I just marked it with a pencil. Don't use a marker. That might be a little bit of overkill. Just use a pencil. That way your memory can come back and help you recall where those were if you were to sand the pencil marks off. The same principle applies. Whoops. I always start with the sander hanging off of the chest, just like this. In fact, it'll be, I'm hanging off the edge and the end. So I'm hanging off this direction and I'm hanging off this other direction as well. This is my starting point. I'm going to come down and back. I'm going to shift about 20 to 30%, like come over an inch to an inch and a half, and then come over, and I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to adjust another inch, inch and a half, come down and back, adjust down and back. I'm going to do that the full width of my panel. And then I'm going to come back, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I go down and back, and then I come back and I do the same thing. And then I'm going to look. I'm going to look at my glue issue here and see if there's anything that I need to concentrate on. But above and beyond that, you're just trying to make your back look the same as your front. So I'm going to start doing that now. Okay, that does not look too bad. But I really can't tell unless the majority of the dust is gone. Just use your hand or use a bench broom. I still have some glue bits, a little bit of glue bits right here that I need to take out. At this point, I can use a little bit of that concentrating sanding force. prominent knots on the back here, the ones that are really big. I have one here. I've got a little bit of cross grain or some scratches still in there. Again, just remember, the knots are harder than the grain of the wood itself. And this one still has some around it as well. This one's clean. This one looks good. That one looks good. And I still have a little bit of a glue bit that looks like it got pressed into the wood. So that's not good. I do have a way of fixing that though. This little glue drip, that looks like it's gone. So I'm going to do a little bit of concentrated sanding right here on this knot and a little bit here on this knot, but I'm not going to concentrate. Remember, I've got to feather it out. I start small and work out and get it bigger and bigger and bigger until I incorporate the whole thing. That's all that it took to get that out, and that looks really good. And a little bit more. That looks good right there as well. Okay, this is looking pretty good. Now, I'm going to have to work on this just a little bit. But that's kind of an advanced type thing. So if you run into deep glue impressions like this one, I'm going to have to work with you guys individually. Okay, that's pretty much on this one. Your next step in the next video, we're going to start using the molding that I milled out, and we're going to trim the sides and the front with that molding that was run in the next video. So stay tuned for that one. This is looking really good.